Hey there Monstars, this is Mark D and welcome back to another totally useless VFX tutorial. Today, we're going to replace this statue with something a little bit more appropriate. So let's get started. We're going to drag our totally original footage into our new composition icon and we're going to look at what we got here. So about a week and a half ago, HBO dropped a teaser for its final season of Game of Thrones. It consisted entirely of footage that will not appear in the final season of Game of Thrones, but it still got the hype train going. So I noticed a little bit of a problem with it when I first saw it, and that is Jon Snow's statue has something a little bit off about it. So what do I mean? If we drag through our footage, we can see that Jon is making a little bit of a stank face, and then we see why. It's because his statue is disgusting. It looks nothing like him. It's hideous and it's not fit for a king. So we're gonna go ahead and replace the statue with something that is fit for a king. And what's more fit for a king than Nigel Thornberry? That's right, we're gonna take this 3D object of Nigel and composite him onto the statue from the Game of Thrones teaser. So I did a little bit of a Google search for a 3D model of Nigel Thornberry, and on myminifactory.com, this fine human being has already gone ahead and 3D modeled him. And indeed, it is smashing. So this file format's actually an STL, an element we're gonna wanna work with an OBJ, but never fear, with a little bit of a Google search for STL to OBJ converter, we get a lot of online resources for us. So all I did was I downloaded Nigel's file from this website, put the file into one of these links here, I believe it was the second one. That link popped out in OBJ for me, I downloaded that, and then I'm right on my way. So shout out to this fine human for going ahead and making a 3D model for Nigel. It was designed for 3D printing, but we're gonna make use of it just fine today. So let's go ahead and look at the final product and see what we're gonna be making. And as you can see, that is much better and much finer. Nigel would be proud. Okay, let's dive right into this. So we're gonna go ahead and select our totally original footage layer and we're gonna scrub through the timeline and find the first frame where the statue comes into view. So this is the first frame. We're gonna go ahead and hit Control-Shift-D on the keyboard, Command-Shift-D if you're on Mac, and we're gonna select this layer and we're gonna name this Statue. Or Stature, why not? We're leaving it as Stature. So we have a stature layer now. So from the stature layer, we're gonna go ahead and 3D track our image. So in our tracker window here on the right side, if you don't see it, select window on the top here, select tracker, and then this will pop up. So with our stature layer selected, we're gonna go ahead and select track camera. So After Effects is gonna run some juju magic here in the background, and we'll just sit here and wait for it to run its thing, and then we'll get right back to the tutorial. Okay, so After Effects is finished with its juju, and now we can go in and place some points here to create a 3D camera. So we scrub through the timeline, we see that there's some track points on the shoulder of the statue, and we got a big old track pointer on this cheek, and we're gonna keep scrubbing through and see what we can lock onto. So we got some nose and a mustache point here, and the shoulder really looks like it has the most texture and the most points to lock onto, so we're gonna focus on this area. So let's just scrub to about this point in the timeline. We're gonna zoom in, and we're gonna make a little bit of a selection. When I say a little bit, I mean a lot. So we're just gonna select all of these points. And now we have a nice little plane selected. And we're gonna right click and we're gonna select Create Solid and Camera. So now in our timeline, we have a Track Solid 1 and a 3D camera. We're gonna go ahead and select Track Solid 1. And we're gonna hit S on the keyboard to bring up our scaling. And we're gonna drag up until we can see our corner widgets. If I hold Shift, it'll come up even faster, and there they are. So let's go ahead and hit W on the keyboard. We're gonna rotate this so it's facing us so we can see it a little bit better. And what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna go to the beginning of our stature layer. We're gonna hit B on the keyboard to change our composition work area. We can change the zoom window to fit, and let's hit play. And right now, all I'm checking is to see if that track solid is locking onto the shoulder as well as I want it to be. It's not moving, it's staying real stiff on there, and that's what I wanna see. That's what Nigel would wanna see. So let's go ahead and pause, and we're gonna get working. So next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna duplicate Track Solid 1. We're gonna rename this to Beware the Normalizer. No reason for the beware, but we're gonna make it anyway. We're gonna go ahead and normalize our 3D working space. So what do I mean by that? If we jump ahead a few steps and create a new solid, just name this E. We're gonna go ahead and use FX Console from Video Copilot and apply Element from Video Copilot. Not sponsored, but if we hit Scene Setup and go right into Element, we're just gonna go ahead and create a quick sphere shape. Hit OK, and now we have a sphere in the layer. If we drag through, This is doing all kinds of wild things. We don't even know what's happening. The sphere is confused. Well, you could say, hey, Mark D, of course it's jumping around. The depth on your sphere isn't the same as the depth on your track solid 1. Well, why don't we go ahead and change that? We go to group 1, create group null. If we hit P on the keyboard with that group selected, we can pick whip this position, drag it to track solid 1's position, and we just hold shift, hit S, and drag up the scale. We can see the null is getting bigger, but the sphere is nowhere to be seen. So we're gonna go ahead, delete this group 1 null and E, and we're gonna start normalizing this 3D camera space. So here's what we gotta do. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna select our beware the normalizer. We're gonna zoom in a little bit. We're gonna rotate this around to be parallel with the camera. So let me show you what I mean. Let's select the Z-axis and just rotate this way. We're gonna get the X-axis, push it away. We're gonna make this nice and flat and zoom in. Not quite flat enough for me. Move that Y. All right, that's looking pretty good. We can work with that. So let's zoom out. Let's do fit up to fit. And now what we can do is we're gonna select track solid 1 and 3D camera tracker, and we're gonna parent these to beware the normalizer. So let's select beware the normalizer. We're gonna hit P on the keyboard, and we're gonna set our position coordinates to be the exact midpoint of the composition. So if you ever forget what your midpoint is, it's really easy. You're gonna take your resolution dimensions and divide them each by 2. So for example, this is a 720p comp. So what we can do is in the X position, we can type in 1280 divided by 2, tab over, and we can type in 720 in the Y divided by 2, go over, and for demonstration's sakes, do 0 divided by 2, and now we have the exact midpoint of our composition. And now we're going to change some rotation settings. We're going to hold shift and press R on the keyboard. It brings up our orientation and rotations. And we're going to change orientation to a very specific amount. So number 1, we're going to change the first value to 270 and then set the next 2 to 0 and hit enter. So we see nothing has changed, and that's exactly what we want. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new solid. Doesn't matter what it's called. And we're going to set this to a 3D layer. And now we can't see it anywhere, but if we zoom in, you can see very teeny tiny. There is black solid number 1. Let's go ahead and fit this to the window again. And now what we can do is select beware the normalizer, hit S on the keyboard, and we're gonna drag our scale down until black solid 1 is roughly the size of our frame. So let's go ahead and hold shift and click and drag this down. Ooh, went too far. And now if I pull down, maybe we'll zoom out. And that's just about, if I hold control, we can fine tune this. If we imagine this moved over, that would be roughly the size of our frame. That's exactly what we want. Doesn't have to be precise, but that's okay. So what we can do is we can take track solid 1, 3D camera tracker, and unparent these. We can delete black solid 1 and beware the normalizer. We can turn off track solid 1. And now what that'll do is anytime we create any 3D related effect or layer, it's gonna pop out directly in the center of track solid 1. And it'll just make our lives much easier. So we're gonna set fit again. And now what we can do is we can right click, create new solid. We're gonna name this LM. And in LM, we're gonna go ahead and use FX console and apply element. And now we can get cracking. Let's also save our project because if this crashed, Nigel would come and find me. So let's hit scene setup. So in element, we can select import and we can select our Nigel Thornberry OBJ wherever you saved it to and just hit OK. And now Nigel will come up in our window and he is balancing on the tip of his nose because that's how Nigel rolls, and he's a man of many talents. But we don't want to emasculate Jon Snow that much, so we're going to go ahead and make Nigel look a little bit more normal. So in our orientation settings here, we can select this first 0, change that to 90, hit enter, and now Nigel's balancing on the bottom of his nose much more like a normal human being. So for my own preference, we're going to set this anchor point to the center of his neck. So let's just go ahead and look at from above, and we're going to change our anchor point XYZ until it's centered in Nigel. So let's change the Z depth. That looks like roughly centered. Let's rotate around, and we're going to move the Y direction, a little downwards, and that's looking much better. Let's rotate around, and that's looking pretty centered to me. And now we want to move all of Nigel up, so this anchor point is now in the center of the grid. So we want to aim to intersect right here. So let's go ahead and grab our Y axis, pull it up. Now let's grab our Z axis and pull it towards us. Let's rotate the camera around, make sure we're where we want to be, maybe a little bit back. Let's get from the side here, and that's looking pretty great. And now what we want to do is we want to add texture to Nigel to match the original footage. So go to presets in the bottom left corner here. we can check out our materials panel. So I've already purchased Pro Shaders 2 from Video Copilot, and in here there's a section called Stone. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag some of these materials onto Nigel, and he's gonna give me a little nod for yes or a shaking head for no to see if he likes it or not. So let's start with Stone Block 2. And the first thing we notice is that we see 0 texture. And why is that? It's because the way the original 3D model was set up wasn't set up in the way Element by default thinks texture should be red. So what we're gonna do is head down here to UV mapping, and we're gonna change UV to box. And just like that, Nigel is now textured appropriately like how we think it should be. And Nigel's shaking his head a little bit no, so we'll try something else. How about Stone Granite Block? And that's gonna be a no as well. How about we try something like Stonewall 02? And that's looking a little bit like a yes to me, but we'll try Stonewall 05 because Nigel may not really know what he wants and he's gonna shake his head a little bit no again. So here's what we're gonna do. We want this texture to be a little bit more higher resolution. What do I mean by that? We can really see the seams of the texture. We can see some blurriness to it. So we want this to look sharper. So how do we get the texture to look sharper? We're gonna go back down to UV mapping and we're gonna change our UV repeat. So it's really important when we change the first number, we change the second number to the same value. So let's double this. Let's set this to 2 and the second number to 2 as well, and we've effectively doubled our resolution in our texture mapping. So that's looking great. Let's go to our scene materials window here, and we can audition on and off the shaders we tried earlier. Let's hit Z on the keyboard to center Nigel, use the scroll wheel to zoom in a little bit. And now let's see what we're dealing with here. So Nigel, let's try Stone Block 02. Shaking this, that's looking pretty nice, but I'm not digging the solid lines here. So we're gonna ignore that. We're gonna try Granite Block. That's not really doing it for me either. We'll try Stonewall 02. Ooh, and that's looking real nice to me. I think Nigel's liking it. Yep, he's giving me a nod. Stonewall 05. Ooh, and that's a hard no. It's too smooth. It's not really what we're looking for. So we're gonna make this Stonewall 02. We can right click in the scene materials, hit remove unused materials. We can hit Z again to zoom out, center him in our frame. We can zoom in a little bit again. And now what we're gonna do is make the bump map a little bit crunchier. So this is the right base texture, but we want it to pop a little bit more. So to do that, we're gonna hit this drop down arrow in our scene window, select Stonewall 02, and in our normal bump map, we're gonna click and drag this up until this is where we want it to be. So going purely by look, that's looking real crunchy. Let's push it further than we need. Ooh, yeah, that's way too far. We're losing some detail in Nigel's eyes, and he doesn't like that. So let's drag this value down. Ooh, maybe something like right there. 72% is what I'm feeling. Nigel seems to be feeling it too. So now the last thing we gotta do is change the base color. So the diffuse color is set to white, and we click that. We can change this to be a little bit warmer like the original footage. So let's go ahead and drag this down to an orange. Maybe let's increase this. And now this is getting closer. Looks a little bit too red, so we can drag this a little bit closer to orange. That's looking better. We can even desaturate this a little bit. Maybe something like right there is where we're gonna land and hit OK. That's looking fantastic. And now, last but not least, is we're gonna play with the environment settings to make this pop even more. Element will shade this model for us using its physical shaders engine based off the environment. So what we're gonna do is select presets, go to environment, and we're gonna select basic 2K, and we're gonna look for the environment that looks the most like the little cave that Jon Snow found himself in. So key elements, we want something that looks pretty shadowy like a cave and something that's already pretty warm. So just going by eye here, we're gonna try this out, and we're just gonna double click that, and already it's looking better than it was before. If we click this environment icon, we can make some setting changes. So for example, maybe we increase the contrast and maybe increase the saturation by a little bit. If we push this too far, we'll see it gets disgusting. So maybe we pull it back. It sounds like right there is looking pretty good to me. We can even change the gamma around. So something like right there is looking pretty great. We'll hit OK in Element, and we'll save it again so Nigel doesn't come to kill us if it crashes. Okay, so we're all saved up. We have Nigel here. We can turn off Track Solid 1, and just like I said it would, Nigel is populated right where Track Solid 1 was. And now, if we just play through this clip, Nigel's latched onto that shoulder like a second head. But we want Nigel to be the only head. So the first thing we're gonna do now is we're gonna go to our element window. We're gonna hit this group 1, go down to create group null and select create. And with our group null created, we're gonna hit enter and we're gonna name this It's Nigel. So with our It's Nigel null, we're gonna go ahead and move this so it's positioned where we want it to be. And you can notice that the null is positioned right where we set it up in element. So this is locked off right at his neck collar, and that's gonna help us when we're aligning this to our original footage. So let's go ahead and fit to window again, and we're gonna position Nigel more appropriately. So this is very important. We have a 3D camera with a 3D element. The motion tracking is based off our 3D depth. So when we move Nigel, we don't just want to grab the null and move it to where we want it. That will mess up our tracking. So let's go ahead and Control Z that. What we want to do is we're going to move this exclusively in the X and Y axes. So with our move tool selected, let's go ahead and zoom in. If we hit tilde, we can full screen this. And now we're going to make sure the mouse says X next to it and just move this over. And we can grab the Y axis, pull, oh, uh-oh. We can go ahead and select our, it's Nigel, null again. We're gonna grab this Y axis and pull it up. We're gonna lock this right at the collar of the statue. Let's go ahead and hit tilde again. We can zoom back out. And now if we hit S on the keyboard, we can drag the scale up until Nigel's head is landing right where we want it to. So his head's looking too small. We want this to be the head of Nigel Thornberry, which should be looming over everyone. So we'll make it bigger. Maybe something like right there. Yeah, that's making me happy, and that's making Nigel very happy. So Nigel right now is the tip of his hair down to just below the nipples, and we wanted to cut off just at his neck. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna create a new solid. We're gonna name this Goodbye Nigel Below the Neck. And we're gonna make sure this is just above our element layer. We're also gonna make this 3D. We're just gonna grab the X-axis. I'm going to grab the Y-axis and pull it up. And we're going to turn off this layer. With that layer turned off, we're going to select our ellipse tool. And we're going to click and drag and lock this off just at Nigel's neck. And we're going to hit V on the keyboard to select our move tool. Select this point. We're just going to move this over a little bit, maybe move the anchor point while holding shift so it moves just that point. Maybe something right there. I'm just lining up that line with the collar on the statue. And now we hit F, we can add a little bit of feathering, maybe by 2. And now we change our element track matte to alpha matte. Nigel's bottom 3/4 vanishes. So we now have a floating Nigel Thornberry neck. Let's play through and make sure this moves. Great. So by setting that Goodbye Nigel Below the Neck layer to a 3D layer and only changing its X and Y position, it's actually being tracked just like Nigel's head is being tracked to the footage. So making one solid mask means we don't have to animate any keyframes for the shape. So Nigel's locked in here. We're gonna go ahead and zoom in. And now Nigel's head appears to be just floating over the footage. It's kind of creepy, and Nigel is a loving man who wouldn't dare creep out Jon Snow, so we're gonna make him blended into the footage even more. So the next step is we're gonna take the fire and we're gonna roto it out, but we don't have to roto it with masks. We can roto it out with a little bit of an effect called extract. So let's select stature. We're gonna duplicate it, drag it to the top of our composition. We're gonna hit enter and name it fire. So with our fire layer, we're gonna go ahead and delete camera tracker. We're gonna add an extract effect. And now if we solo that layer, we can see we drag this top left corner over. It's gonna change the alpha channel based off the luminance. So we're gonna move this over until we have nothing left but fire. If we drag the bottom left handle, this is gonna soften that key. So we'll keep playing around with this until we get a nice soft roll off. And now if we turn off that solo, we can see it over Nigel. And so just like that, we have a pretty decent key already. So we get a bit of a hard edge on the fire, which isn't great. If we isolate the stature layer, we can see what the fire looked like originally. It's not really soft to begin with, but we wanted to look a little bit softer and cleaner for Nigel's sake. So that's a very simple solution. We just go ahead and apply simple choker in our choke matte. If we bring this number into a positive value, it's gonna reduce how much of the fire we see, but we don't wanna reduce, we actually wanna add a little bit. So let's go ahead and move this down while holding control to fine tune it. And you can see the fire's growing. And in its growth, it's also gonna smooth out these rough edges. So if we turn that off and on, we can see we're getting a little bit of a smoother fire now in front of Nigel. So let's go ahead and select fit and play through this again. And now that fire's looking much, much better. So now we're gonna play with Nigel's actual settings. So let's go to the beginning of our timeline. We're gonna select element. And we're gonna go down to our render settings. And we scroll down, there's ambient occlusion. We're gonna go ahead and turn this bad boy on. And just by turning it on, you can see it made a little bit of a subtle change to Nigel. We'll audition that off and on. You can see it's changing it, adding some very vague, shadowy looking stuff. And we increase our SSAO intensity. We can see it gets really shadowy. It can get pushed too far. Do not go too far. So let's undo that. And now what we're gonna do is just set this to a much more conservative value, like maybe 4. And that's looking a little bit tastier for me, looking tastier for Nigel as well. So we're gonna add some lighting effects to this. So we're gonna go down to our composition, select new, light. We're gonna make this a point light, and we're gonna name this light Fire Light, and hit enter. So now what we can do is we can move this light around to be positioned along with the fire. So let's go to the very beginning of our stature layer, and we're gonna grab our light. We're just gonna move this in the x-axis, and we're gonna pull this up to be centered with the flames. And notice how I'm only moving it in single directions at a time. So maybe we can pull this up. Now we grab the z-axis, we can push this by holding shift closer to Nigel and further away. So we want this to create some realistic shadows. So if we go ahead and solo the stature layer, we can see what the shadows are looking like originally. With the fire on the far left, we see that the light is hitting the right side of the original disgusting statue. So we want to mimic that. So with our fire light selected, we can see the light is hitting the right side of the model. That's pretty great. Maybe we'll elevate this, push this over to the left. And something like right there is looking pretty great. Okay, now we can see that Nigel's lower 3/4 has appeared again. No worries, that's just because the firelight has gotten in the way of our element layer. So we can drag this firelight to be above everything. And now that's back to normal. Let's fit this to the window. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna manually animate some keyframes for this light so that it follows the fire. So we're gonna go ahead and hold Shift and Alt on the keyboard and hit P. And now we've made a position keyframe for our firelight. And we drag through the timeline. Let's go to the very end, move the x-axis over to where the fire ends up. And now we drag through the timeline just to make sure it's following the fire accurately. We can fine tune this as needed. So maybe we'll go to the midpoint, push this over a little bit that way, see how that works. And that's looking much more accurate. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and play through this. And we can see we're getting some great shadowing on Nigel that's reacting to the light we just created. And as Nigel would say, great job, Mark. I'm proud of you, son. So we're gonna make some adjustments to the original footage to remove the ugliest face Jon Snow has ever seen. So this is gonna be pretty easy. We're gonna go ahead and select new solid again. We're gonna name this goodbye face and hit enter. We're gonna drag this to be just above stature. We're gonna make this a 3D layer. We're gonna move the X coordinate over, bring the Y coordinate up. And this is so it's linked to the 3D camera tracker as we want it to be. We can toggle that solo off, turn off the eyeball. We're gonna zoom in and we're gonna create a shape around the head. We're just gonna grab our pen tool by hitting G. Just gonna make a very rough shape around here. Looking at the collar here, clicking and dragging for our curves. I'm gonna make sure to get the ears out on the side. Close the shape. Now we turn that on. Solo it with stature. We can hit F on the keyboard, maybe turn off the edges. Let's just feather this out a little bit, maybe like 9. And now we select none in track matte. We can change this to alpha inverted. And now that face is gone, thank God. But now we gotta fill that hole. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna unsolo stature. Nigel's head's floating around there. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna create a new solid. And we're gonna select this eyedropper and we're gonna pick camera black. So maybe it'll be something like this color and hit OK. We're gonna drag this to be below stature. We're gonna make this a 3D layer as well. Let's reposition this so that it's truly behind and covering that hole. And it's important to make this track with us because we're gonna create some depth inside the hole. So let's go ahead. We're gonna apply a gradient ramp to this layer. And we're gonna select one of these colors, a darker shadow. We're gonna select one of these brighter glows like right here. And then we're going to change our end ramp to be around here. And then our start ramp to be about here. And if we solo these two layers, we can kind of see what that's doing. Let's change this to radial ramp. So it's really hard to see right now. So let's maybe change the start color to something a little bit brighter. Yeah, and that's looking a little bit better. Hit OK. And now we can reposition this to look like light is falling off into the statue, as if it were hollow and Nigel was sprouting out of the stone statue, which is pretty great, and what Nigel would want anyway. So we're gonna play around with these position points until it's somewhere that we're happy with. That's looking nice and smooth. We're gonna get some banding, but that's okay because we can just go ahead and apply a noise effect. Set this to a really low value, like 2. That'll just smooth out the gradient. And that's looking cleaner. And now, to make this even smoother, we can go to our goodbye face layer and just drag up the feathering amount. And there we go. We have a much smoother edge. Now we unsolo those. We can see Nigel is composited, and we have painted out the disgusting face. So let's play through this. So right now we can see that there's a little bit of edge blending issues with the paint job we just did. That's looking a little bit darker than it should be, especially when it flickers. So let's select our dark orange solid we created. Let's apply a curves effect. And now we can just bring up the luminance until it matches a little bit better. Maybe something like right there. Let's audition that off and on. Yeah, that's better. Let's play through. And yeah, that's looking a little bit cleaner to me. All right, next up, we need to add some glow to the fire because right now it's just only in front of Nigel, but we want that fire to have a glow to it. So we're gonna select our fire layer and we're gonna add a glow to it. So that's a really tight glow. Let's maybe bring this intensity down to something like 0.2. So we audition that off and on. You can see it's just a little bit bright and poppy, but we're not looking for bright and poppy. We want this to actually be a very large radius. So let's drag this up. Maybe bring up the intensity again. We turn this off and on. We can see that's adding a little bit more of what we want. We can even add a curves effect. Maybe increase this to about there, and then add a hue saturation effect and bring up the saturation of the glow. And there we go. Let's go ahead and fit our window and play through. And Nigel would be pretty happy with that. Let's just maybe bring down our curves effect and even reduce our glow intensity to 0.2 again. And there we go. A much tighter glow, something that looks a little bit more subtle. And now what we got to do is make Nigel blend in a little bit more by adding some color adjustments. So we changed the diffuse color earlier in Element, but you know, not quite exactly where we wanted to be. The original footage has a little bit more red in the color. It's also more saturated than the current element. So what we're going to do is select our element layer. We're going to twirl down element. We're going to apply a curves effect, and we're going to apply a hue saturation effect. So the footage is crunchier than our element. You can see our shadows have a little bit of detail in them. We want our shadows to be dark and crunchy and crisp. So let's go ahead and crunch those shadows. Add a curves and bring up the highlights. That'll increase our contrast. Already looking better. Maybe this is looking a little bit too red. We want some more orange. So maybe we just go down to our red channel and pull away some red. Maybe something like right there. Audition that off and on. It's looking better. And now we can go ahead and increase our saturation just by a hair. Now we fit our window again. We can see Nigel's blending much better. So next thing we got to do is our footage is very compressed and very bad looking. So we want to add some compression to Nigel. Our totally original footage has compression on it, and Nigel is a very sharp looking fellow, as he always is meant to be, but we have to compress him a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to twirl down these curves and hue saturation effects. We're going to apply mosaic, and he's gone. But that's okay. We're going to bring him back. We're going to right click. We're going to select expression controls, and we're going to select slider control. And now what we're going to do is select mosaic. We're going to hit S twice on the keyboard, and it'll bring up mosaic in the timeline. Hit that little drop down box. We're going to alt click horizontal blocks, grab this pick whip, select slider. We're going to do the same thing to vertical blocks. We're going to pick whip it to slider, hit enter, and now we can drag this number up, and it's going to change horizontal and vertical at the same time. It'll just make our lives much easier. So we want them to look compressed, maybe something like right there. Maybe something like right there. It's looking pretty good. We're going to add a fast box blur to just soften him out a little bit. Maybe make this 0.3. Ooh, yeah, it's looking a little bit too much. Maybe change this down to 2 iterations. And now we go back to fit. Nigel's looking pretty compressed to me. In fact, he's almost too blurry. So maybe what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and change our blur radius to 0.2. Hit enter. There we go. And he's looking a little bit underexposed again. So maybe we'll add an exposure effect. We're going to drag this to be just above mosaic. We're just going to hold control while dragging exposure up. Maybe right there is where we'll land. And if we want, we can change our gamma correction to bring the shadows back down. We'll audition that off and on. And that's looking like just the right adjustment. Let's go ahead and play through our clip. So he's still looking like he's not quite fully illuminated. So we can change our firelight. Hit T on the keyboard to bring up our intensity. We can increase this to maybe something like right there. And as you can see, as I increase this, it's also changing the painted out background. So let's focus on just Nigel to match him with the statue. Let's drag this down to about there's looking pretty good. And now what we can do to our dark orange solid, we can hit AA on the keyboard. It's going to bring up material options. And in the section that says accepts lights, we're going to select off. And now it's independent of that. So now we could change that light intensity all day long and we'd be good to go. Okay, let's play through this again. Nigel's looking more blended. Maybe the background paint job is a little bit too bright now. So we can go ahead and select dark orange solid, bring down this curve. Yeah, maybe like right there. That's a good in between. All right, last but not least, we're going to zoom into Nigel. We're going to dirty this up a little bit more. We're going to go ahead and select our element layer, and we're going to apply a noise effect. We're going to make this something like 4%. And that's looking nice and grimy. Maybe even 5. Let's go back out to the fit window, play through. 5 looks like it's a little bit too much. Let's bring this down to maybe 3.5. Play again. All right, and there we go. We have Nigel Thornberry composited onto Jon Snow's statue. So let's play this all together in context. We're going to select all of these. We're just going to hit Alt, open bracket on the keyboard to lock them off there. Go to the beginning, hit B on the keyboard. Let's play through our clip. Okay, and there's one last thing that we didn't get to do yet, and that is making the fire flicker in a way that matches our original footage. So we're going to fix that right up in just a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit B on the keyboard to bring back up our workspace to just the clip we want to focus on. We're going to go ahead and select our firelight layer and hit T on the keyboard to bring up our intensity. And we're going to go ahead and hold Alt and click the stopwatch icon next to intensity. We're going to type in a little expression. We're going to type in wiggle, open parentheses. We're going to type in 6,45. And that is saying to change our intensity value 6 times a second by a maximum amount of 45. We're going to go ahead and hit enter on the numpad. And now, if we play through this clip, the torch light is flickering just like the footage is. And now we get a nice little flicker effect on Nigel, and he's feeling warm and welcome in this cave with with Jon. And you know what? Nigel's looking a little bit too contrasty to me, a little bit too crunchy. So we're going to change some of the color effects we applied to him earlier. We're going to go back to LM. We're going to open up the effects controls, and we're going to change our original curves layer. He's looking a little bit crunchy for my liking, so we're going to make sure we're in RGB here. We're going to drag up the shadows we pulled down. Let's just push these up a little bit, and we'll split that difference, maybe like right around there. That's looking pretty great to me. Maybe he's looking, like he needs to be a little bit more yellow, so we'll open the blue channel. We're just going to pull the blues out. Ooh, and right there is looking pretty dandy to me. You know what, maybe we'll play through this again and see if we have to make any more changes. Maybe he's looking a little bit too dark again, so maybe we'll bring up our exposure by just a little bit. Maybe something like right there. Yeah, I'm liking that. We'll hit play again. Yeah, now Nigel's looking much better to me. Maybe we'll just increase the saturation by a hair. Let's go to our hue saturation effect. Maybe we'll bring this up. Maybe something like right there. Let's hit play. Yeah, Nigel's looking much nicer now. Okay, and the last thing we'll do is we're gonna feather out this background edge a little bit more. So let's select goodbye face, hit F on the keyboard. Let's just drag this amount up. Maybe something like right there. Maybe we'll undo. Drag this number up again by a little bit, holding control on the keyboard. I think right there is something that will work for me. We're getting a little bit of his beard down there, so what we're gonna do is turn back on our masks, and we're just gonna select these points. We're gonna drag them down to hide that beard. Maybe we'll hide this edge as well. Let's play through the clip. Maybe we'll pull this out, make this a little bit tighter. Let's go to the end of the clip. Let's play through. So we're getting a little bit of the beard. Maybe it looks like his ear over here, so that's easy. Let's just grab these 2 points, pull them over, and hide that edge. Okay, I think we're okay. Let's go ahead and play through this. All right, let's go ahead and fit this to window. Go to the beginning of the timeline, hit B on the keyboard. We're gonna play through this. And just like that, we have the crossover no one ever asked for, but nobody will say no to. Game of Thrones and the Wild Thornberrys living together as one solid entity. All right, fantastic. So, go ahead and feel free to use these techniques in your own project. Maybe you got a statue in the background of a shot that's really bringing down the mood and you want to lighten things up, so you composite Nigel Thornberry in there. Or maybe you're making a horror film and there's this really creepy statue in the forefront and you think it's a little bit too creepy, so you want to lighten the mood and you just put Nigel Thornberry's face on it. Or hey, maybe your main character is a statue and you just don't know how to make them a little bit more likable, so you go ahead, you use these techniques, and you composite Nigel Thornberry onto all of your shots in your film. So just like that, we've solved a plethora of problems that you may face in your own projects, and all you need is a little bit of After Effects know-how, Element 3D, and Nigel Thornberry, plus a little smidgen of can-do spirit, and you're going to be tackling those problems like a pro. Alright everybody, I'm Mark D. This has been a totally useless VFX tutorial. I hope you learned a thing or two. I appreciate it. Nigel appreciates it. If you have an idea for a tutorial that you'd want to see in the future, drop a line in the comments down below. We'll give it a read. We'll give it a consider. Hey, who knows? Maybe we'll feature your idea in an upcoming tutorial. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a smashing day.